The knife went through my heart on a Tuesday. I remember because Emma had always hated Tuesdays, said they were unlucky. Turns out she was right, just not in the way she thought. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the moment I opened my eyes and realized I was 22 again, lying in our childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling I'd memorized in another lifetime. The wedding dress hung on the door, white silk with tiny pearls, the one I'd worn to marry Tim Lee. The same dress I'd be buried in 3 years later. But this time, I knew what was coming. You see, I've lived this life before. I felt Tim's hands turn cold when the money started flowing, watched his eyes grow distant when I couldn't give him children, felt the slow poison my sister fed me take hold of my body month by month. I've died once already, and death has a way of teaching you things about life that the living never learn. The morning light filtered through our shared bedroom window just like it had 15 years ago, or was it yesterday? Time becomes fluid when you've been given impossible second chances. Emma was still asleep in the bed across from mine, her face peaceful in a way it never was when she was awake. Even in sleep, she clutched her phone, probably dreaming of Tim Lee and all the wealth she thought he'd bring her. If only she knew what I knew. I sat up slowly, my body feeling strange and young again. 22. God, I'd forgotten how it felt to move without the constant ache of poison in my bones, to breathe without that burning sensation in my lungs that had marked my final months. My reflection in the mirror showed a face I hadn't seen in years, clear skin, bright eyes, hope still lingering in the corners of my mouth. I looked like someone who believed in happy endings. How naive that girl had been. Emma stirred as I got up, her eyes fluttering open to fix on me with that familiar mixture of love and resentment that had defined our relationship since birth. We were twins, but not identical. She was the beautiful one, the one people noticed first, the one who turned heads when we walked into a room. I was the smart one, the responsible one, the one who cleaned up her messes and smiled while doing it. Lisa, she mumbled, stretching like a cat, I had the strangest dream. I dreamed we switched fiancés, and I was going to marry Tim instead of Ryan. My heart stopped. She had the same memories? No, her eyes were too clear, too hopeful. This was just coincidence, or maybe some echo of the other timeline bleeding through. Emma had always been intuitive in the strangest ways. That would be quite a switch, I said carefully, testing the waters. She sat up suddenly, fully awake now, her expression calculating in a way that made my stomach turn with familiar dread. Actually, Lisa, we need to talk about something important. Here it comes. The moment that had started everything, the conversation that had sealed both our fates. In my previous life, I'd been caught completely off guard, too shocked by Emma's audacity to think clearly. But I'd had 15 years to think about this moment, 15 years to plan what I'd say when it came again. I settled back onto my bed, arranging my expression into the same trusting confusion I'd worn the first time. What is it, Emma? She got up and began pacing, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. Emma had always been a pacer when she was working up to something terrible. I've been thinking about our weddings. About Tim and Ryan. What about them? I kept my voice level, curious but not suspicious. Let her think she was in control. Well, you know how Tim's been struggling with his business lately. And Ryan. She paused dramatically, and I had to bite my lip to keep from finishing her sentence. I knew her script by heart. Ryan's injury from the war, his limp, the way he can barely provide for himself, let alone a wife. Ryan is a good man, I said quietly, the same words I'd used before. The difference was, this time I meant them with every fiber of my being. Emma spun around, her eyes bright with tears that I now knew were carefully manufactured. Of course he is. That's not what I'm saying. It's just. Lisa, I think we might be making a mistake. I think maybe we've chosen the wrong men. The audacity of it still took my breath away. Emma, who had flirted shamelessly with Tim at every opportunity, who had made cutting remarks about Ryan's disability, who had spent months undermining my relationship while building up her own case for Tim's affections. Now she wanted to play it off as a mutual mistake, as if I'd had any choice in the matter. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. "I mean," she said, sitting on the edge of my bed with that earnest expression she'd perfected in childhood, "I think I should marry Tim, and you should marry Ryan." There it was. The moment that had destroyed us both, laid out again like a trap I was expected to walk into blindly. Emma reached for my hands, her fingers warm and soft from her nightly moisturizing ritual. "Think about it, Lisa. Tim needs someone who can help him rebuild, someone who understands business and networking. You're too gentle for that world, too trusting. You'd get eaten alive." It was remarkable, really, how she managed to make her naked greed sound like concern for my well-being. In my previous life, I'd actually believed her for a moment. I'd thought maybe she was right, maybe I wasn't cut out for Tim's ambitious world. "And Ryan," she continued, warming to her theme, "he needs someone who can be completely devoted to him, someone who doesn't have distractions or ambitions of her own. Someone who can focus entirely on being a perfect military wife." The insult was wrapped so prettily in compliments that I'd missed it entirely the first time. Emma was painting me as a doormat, a woman with no dreams or desires of her own, someone whose highest calling was to serve a man she was implying wasn't worth much anyway. I let my face show uncertainty, confusion, the exact expression she was expecting. "Emma, I love Tim. We're getting married tomorrow." "But do you really love him?" she pressed, and I had to admire the skill with which she was dismantling my entire life. "Or do you love the idea of him? Lisa, I've watched you with Ryan. You light up around him in a way you never do with Tim." This was new. In my previous life, she hadn't used this particular angle. She was getting better at manipulation, or maybe I was remembering it wrong. The thing about trauma is that it changes your memories, makes you doubt what really happened. But I did remember lighting up around Ryan. I remembered the way he made me laugh, how safe I felt in his presence, how he looked at me like I was something precious and rare. I'd forgotten about all of that in the whirlwind of Emma's machinations and Tim's courtship. "I think," Emma said softly, playing her final card, "that we've been so focused on what we thought we wanted that we've missed what we actually need." It was a masterpiece of manipulation. She'd managed to make stealing my fiancé sound like an act of love, like she was saving me from making a terrible mistake. And the worst part was, she wasn't entirely wrong. Tim would make me miserable, I knew that now. But not for the reasons Emma thought. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, seeing both the girl I'd grown up loving and the woman who would poison me in 3 years' time. Her beautiful face was open and earnest, her eyes bright with what looked like genuine concern. She probably even believed her own lies on some level. Emma had always been good at convincing herself that what she wanted was what everyone wanted. "You really think we should switch?" I asked, letting my voice tremble slightly. Relief flooded her features. "I think it would be better for everyone. Tim and I understand each other, Lisa. We want the same things: success, wealth, a place in society. You and Ryan, you both have such good hearts. You'd be happy together." Happy. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. In my previous life, I'd thought happiness was Tim's charm and promises, his grand plans and bigger-than-life personality. I'd learned too late that happiness was quiet mornings and gentle hands, was someone who held you when you cried and never made you doubt your own worth. I'd learned that happiness was Ryan Carter. But Emma didn't know that. Emma thought she was getting the better deal, the man who would make her rich and important. She had no idea that Tim's business was built on lies and borrowed money, that his charm hid a cruel and selfish heart, that his family would treat her like an unwanted burden the moment the novelty wore off. She had no idea that Ryan would inherit his grandfather's land, that his military connections would open doors to opportunities she couldn't imagine, that his quiet strength would build an empire while Tim's flashy schemes crumbled to dust. Most importantly, she had no idea that Tim was infertile, that his first wife had left him for that very reason, that he'd spend years blaming Emma for their childlessness while seeking comfort in other women's beds. I knew all of this because I'd lived it. I'd watched Tim's true nature emerge once the wedding ring was on my finger. I'd endured his coldness when the doctor confirmed what he already knew, that the problem wasn't with me. I'd suffered through his mother's snide comments about my supposed barrenness while she coddled her son's lies. And I'd seen Ryan from afar, building a life of quiet contentment with a wife who appreciated him. I'd watched him succeed in ways that had nothing to do with flash and everything to do with substance. I'd wondered, in my darkest moments, what my life might have been like if I'd chosen differently. Now I was getting the chance to find out. Okay, I said softly, and watched Emma's face light up with triumph. If you really think that's what's best. She threw her arms around me, and I let her hold me while I planned her destruction. It sounds harsh, but you have to understand, Emma had killed me. Maybe not quickly, maybe not obviously, but she'd poisoned me drop by drop, day by day, until my body gave up its fight for life. She'd sat by my bedside in those final weeks, holding my hand and whispering about how sorry she was, how much she loved me, never confessing what she'd done. I'd died loving her. I'd died believing her grief was real. But rebirth has a way of clarifying things. When you die knowing that the person you trust most in the world has been slowly murdering you, it changes your perspective on forgiveness. So yes, I was going to let Emma make her choice. I was going to smile and step aside and let her walk straight into the hell she'd created for both of us in our first life. Because this time, I knew exactly what I was giving up, and what I was getting in return. The rest of that day passed in a blur of wedding preparations and family chaos. Our parents were beside themselves when we announced the switch, but Emma and I presented a united front. We'd realized we'd made a mistake, we said. We wanted to fix it before it was too late. Love was more important than convention. Our mother cried. Our father threatened to cancel both weddings. But in the end, they gave in, the way they always did when Emma set her heart on something. The dresses were altered, the seating charts were changed, the ministers were informed. It was chaos, but it was manageable chaos. Tim took the news with surprising grace, which should have been Emma's first warning. A man who truly loved me would have fought for me, would have demanded explanations, would have refused to be passed around like a party favor. Instead, Tim just shrugged and said he wanted us all to be happy. I saw Emma's face falter slightly at his easy acceptance, saw doubt flicker in her eyes for just a moment before she pushed it away. She wanted Tim too badly to let his indifference slow her down. Ryan's reaction was different. He asked to speak with me privately, and I found myself sitting across from him in our garden, looking into the kindest eyes I'd ever known. He was handsome in a quiet way, with dark hair and strong features marked by laugh lines and one thin scar along his jaw from his military service. His left leg was stiff from an injury that had ended his active duty, but he moved with a dignity that made the disability seem insignificant. "Lisa," he said quietly, "I need to know this is what you really want." The question caught me off guard. In my previous life, Ryan had been told about the switch secondhand. We'd barely spoken before our wedding, both of us too caught up in the chaos to have a real conversation. I started, then stopped. What could I tell him? That I was madly in love with him based on glimpses of a life we'd never shared? That I'd died loving someone else but been reborn knowing he was my destiny? I know this must seem sudden, I said instead. But I think Emma and Tim are better suited for each other. And you and I. I looked into his eyes, searching for words that wouldn't sound insane. I think we could be good together. He studied my face for a long moment, and I had the strangest feeling that he could see straight through to my soul. You seem different today, he said finally. Older somehow. Like you've seen things the rest of us haven't. My heart stopped. Could he somehow know? Could he sense the impossible truth of what I'd lived through? We all have moments that change us, I said carefully. He nodded slowly. Yes, we do. His hand reached across the space between us, and I let him take mine. His touch was warm and steady, completely different from Tim's possessive grip. Lisa, I want you to know that if you marry me, I'll spend every day trying to make you happy. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Tears stung my eyes. This was what I'd missed in my first life, what I'd given up without even knowing it existed. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, but simple, honest devotion. I'd like that, I whispered. The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect wedding weather. Emma was radiant in my dress, it fit her better than it had ever fit me, as if it had been made for her all along. She kept catching glimpses of herself in mirrors and windows, preening like a cat in the sunshine. You look beautiful, I told her, and I meant it. Emma had always been beautiful, but on her wedding day she glowed with the satisfaction of getting everything she'd ever wanted. So do you, she said, adjusting the simple blue dress I'd chosen for my own ceremony. It wasn't as elaborate as the white gown, but it suited me better, understated, elegant, real. The ceremonies were small, held in our family's backyard with just close friends and relatives present. Emma went first, radiating joy as she walked down the makeshift aisle to where Tim waited. He looked handsome in his rented tuxedo, his smile bright and charming as always. I watched my sister marry the man I'd thought I loved, and I felt nothing. No jealousy, no regret, no sense of loss. Just a quiet satisfaction at seeing the first piece of the puzzle fall into place. Then it was my turn. I walked the same path Emma had taken minutes before, but everything felt different. Ryan waited for me at the altar in his dress uniform, and the sight of him took my breath away. He looked strong and capable and infinitely patient, like a man who would weather any storm that came his way. Our eyes met as I approached, and he smiled, not the practiced charm Tim had offered Emma, but something real and warm and just for me. I felt something in my chest crack open, some wall I'd built around my heart in my previous life crumbling away. The ceremony was simple. We spoke our vows in voices that didn't shake, promised to love and honor each other through whatever came. When Ryan kissed me, it was gentle and sweet, nothing like the passionate claim Tim had made on Emma's mouth. But it felt like coming home. The reception was held at the local community center, and I found myself watching Emma throughout the evening. She was in her element, holding court at the head table, accepting congratulations and admiring glances. Tim was attentive in the way he knew people were watching, his arm around her waist, his smile never wavering. But I saw the moments between the performance. The way his eyes wandered to other women. The way his grip on Emma's waist was just a little too tight when she got too animated talking to other men. The way he checked his phone obsessively, as if he were already thinking about Monday morning and the business deals that mattered more to him than the woman he'd just married. Emma was too happy to notice, too caught up in the fantasy of being Mrs. Tim Lee to see the reality sitting right beside her. Ryan and I left early, citing his need to rest his injured leg. It wasn't entirely a lie. I could see the subtle signs of pain he was trying to hide, the careful way he favored his right side. But it was also an escape, a chance to be alone together without the weight of everyone's expectations. He drove me to a small apartment near the military base where he worked as a consultant. It wasn't much, one bedroom, basic furniture, everything clean but sparse. Tim's place was flashier, all modern fixtures and expensive electronics he couldn't really afford. But Ryan's home felt solid, dependable, like the man himself. I know it's not much, he said, suddenly seeming younger and uncertain. I've been saving up to buy a house, but with the medical bills from my injury. It's perfect, I said, and meant it. I'd lived in Tim's showcase home, where everything was chosen for effect rather than comfort. This was better. This was real. Our wedding night was nothing like my first one. Tim had been demanding and selfish, taking what he wanted with little thought for my comfort or pleasure. Ryan was different, gentle, patient, asking questions with his touch, making sure I was with him every step of the way. Afterwards, we lay tangled in his simple sheets, and he traced patterns on my bare shoulder with one finger. I still can't quite believe this is real, he said quietly. Yesterday I thought I was going to spend my life alone. Why would you think that? I asked, though I knew the answer. In my previous life, I'd heard the whispers, that Ryan Carter was damaged goods, that his injury made him less of a man, that any woman who married him would be settling. Come on, Lisa. We both know I'm not exactly a prize catch. Military pension, a bad leg, no family to speak of except my grandfather. I turned in his arms so I could see his face. You're wrong about that. About all of it. You don't have to. I'm not being kind, I interrupted. I'm being honest. Ryan, you're the kindest, strongest, most genuine man I've ever known. Any woman would be lucky to have you. He looked at me like I'd said something miraculous, and I realized that no one had ever told him that before. Everyone saw his limitations, his injury, his modest circumstances. No one saw his potential, his character, his unshakable integrity. Except me. And I only saw it because I'd had the advantage of looking back from the end of both our stories. The first months of our marriage were a revelation. I'd been prepared for the contrast between Ryan and Tim, but I hadn't been prepared for how different I would be as Ryan's wife versus who I'd been as Tim's. With Tim, I'd constantly felt like I was performing, trying to be the woman he wanted me to be. I'd made myself smaller, quieter, more compliant, always afraid of disappointing him or driving him away. I'd lost pieces of myself day by day until I wasn't sure who I was anymore. With Ryan, I found myself expanding. He encouraged my opinions, asked for my advice, listened when I spoke. When I mentioned my old dream of starting a nonprofit, he didn't dismiss it as a cute hobby the way Tim had. Instead, he helped me research funding options and introduced me to contacts who might be able to help. You light up when you talk about this, he said one evening as I spread grant applications across our kitchen table. It's beautiful to watch. I looked up from the paperwork, struck by the sincerity in his voice. Tim used to say it was impractical. A waste of time. Ryan's expression darkened slightly. Tim was wrong about a lot of things. He was right, though it would take me months to fully understand just how wrong. The news started filtering back through mutual friends and family connections. Tim's business was struggling more than anyone had realized. Emma had quit her job to focus on being a society wife, only to discover that Tim's social circle was built on credit and connections rather than actual wealth. She called me 3 months after our wedding, her voice bright and cheerful but with an undertone I recognized from childhood, the sound Emma made when she was starting to panic but didn't want anyone to know. Lisa. How are you? How's married life treating you? It's wonderful, I said, and it was true. Ryan and I had fallen into an easy rhythm of domestic happiness that felt as natural as breathing. How are you and Tim? Oh, we're fantastic. Just fantastic. Tim's working on some really exciting business deals. We're thinking about buying a bigger house soon. Everything she said was probably true, in the technical sense. Tim was always working on exciting deals that never quite materialized. They were probably thinking about buying a bigger house, even as the bills piled up and the creditors started calling. That's wonderful, Emma. Listen, I was wondering, do you think Ryan might know anyone who could help Tim with some connections? Military contracts, government work, that sort of thing? There it was. Emma was already starting to see the cracks in her perfect plan, already beginning to understand that she might have chosen poorly. But instead of facing that reality, she was trying to use my marriage to shore up her own. I can ask him, I said neutrally. Oh, would you? That would be amazing. Tim's just been working so hard, and he has such great ideas, he just needs the right opportunities. I listened to her make excuses for another 10 minutes, each one a small betrayal of the confident woman who had stolen my fiancé. When she finally hung up, I sat staring at the phone for a long time. Ryan found me like that when he came home from work, and I told him about the call. His expression was carefully neutral as he listened, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. What do you want me to do? He asked when I finished. What do you mean? I mean, do you want me to help him? Tim. The name came out flat, emotionless. I thought about it seriously. In my previous life, I would have begged Ryan to help, would have felt guilty for not doing everything I could to support my sister's marriage. But I wasn't that person anymore. No, I said simply. I don't think I do. Ryan nodded once, a sharp movement that somehow conveyed approval. Good. Because I looked into his business after the wedding, and Lisa, your sister married a man who's about to lose everything. The confirmation of what I already knew should have made me happy, but instead I felt a strange sadness. Not for Tim, he'd created his own problems through greed and dishonesty. But for Emma, who had no idea what was coming. How long do you think he has? I asked. 6 months, maybe less. His main investor is getting nervous, and once word gets out. Ryan shrugged. These things happen fast in business. One day you're on top of the world, the next day no one will return your calls. I thought about my sister, probably at that very moment planning the social events and charity galas she thought would cement her place in society. She'd married Tim for his money and connections, and both were about to disappear. Meanwhile, my quiet, injured military husband was slowly building something real and lasting. The consulting work was just the beginning. Ryan had plans, long-term strategies that would pay off in years rather than months. His grandfather's property, which Tim had probably dismissed as worthless farmland, included mineral rights that were about to become very valuable indeed. But I didn't tell Emma any of this when she called again a few weeks later, her voice a little less bright, a little more strained. Lisa, I was wondering, would you and Ryan like to have dinner with us this weekend? Maybe at that new restaurant downtown? I almost laughed. The Emma I'd known growing up had never invited me anywhere unless she needed something. And the new restaurant downtown was notoriously expensive, not the kind of place you suggested unless you were trying to project an image of wealth. We'd love to, I said, curious to see how far the cracks had spread. The dinner was illuminating. Tim was charming as ever, regaling us with stories of his business successes and plans for expansion. But I could see the strain around his eyes, the way he kept checking his phone, the subtle signs of a man under pressure. Emma played her part perfectly, the devoted wife hanging on her husband's every word. But her smile was too bright, her laugh a note too high. She was performing harder than I'd ever seen her perform. So Ryan, Tim said over dessert, Emma mentioned you might have some government connections. I'm always looking for new opportunities, ways to give back to the community through defense contracts. The way he phrased it made it sound altruistic, but we all knew what he was really asking for. Ryan's expression didn't change, but his voice was cooler when he answered. I might know some people. What kind of work are you looking to get into? For the next 20 minutes, Tim pitched elaborate schemes involving military technology and government partnerships, each one more unrealistic than the last. Ryan listened politely, asked thoughtful questions, and gave absolutely no indication that he would be helping with any of it. As we drove home, Ryan was quiet until I asked what he was thinking. I'm thinking your sister has no idea what she's gotten herself into, he said finally. And I'm thinking Tim Lee is exactly the kind of man who'll drag her down with him rather than admit he's failed. He was right, of course. Over the next few months, the calls from Emma became more frequent and more desperate, though she tried to hide it. Could Ryan help with this connection? Did he know anyone who worked in that industry? Would we be interested in investing in an exciting new opportunity? Each request was wrapped in sisterly affection and family loyalty, but the underlying message was clear: Emma's perfect life was crumbling, and she expected me to help hold it together. I didn't. Not because I was cruel, but because I'd learned something important in my first life. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them face the consequences of their choices. Besides, I was too busy building my own life to focus on shoring up Emma's mistakes. The nonprofit I'd started was thriving, funded partly by grants I'd secured and partly by Ryan's quiet contributions. We'd moved into a larger apartment and were looking at houses, real ones with solid foundations and room to grow. Ryan's work was evolving too. The consulting had led to a partnership opportunity with a defense contractor, which had led to government connections that Tim would have killed for. My husband was becoming quietly, steadily successful, the kind of success that built wealth slowly and held it for generations. Emma knew none of this, of course. To her, we were still the couple who'd gotten the consolation prize, the military man with the bad leg and the woman who'd been too weak to fight for what she wanted. The illusion shattered one Thursday morning when Emma showed up at our door unannounced, her perfect hair disheveled and her makeup smeared by tears. "Lisa," she sobbed, throwing herself into my arms, "I need your help. Tim's in trouble. Real trouble." I led her to our kitchen, made her tea with hands that didn't shake, and waited for the confession I'd been expecting for months. "It's all falling apart," she whispered. "The business, the investors, everything. Tim says it's just temporary, that he can fix it, but Lisa, they're going to take the house. They're going to take everything. I'm so sorry, Emma." And I was sorry, in a way. Sorry that she'd had to learn this lesson, sorry that she'd chosen pride over love, sorry that she was my sister and I couldn't save her from herself. "You have to help us," she continued, gripping my hands across the table. "Ryan has connections, resources. He could help Tim get back on his feet." "Emma." I started, but she cut me off. "Please, Lisa. I'm begging you. I know I pushed you toward Ryan, I know you didn't get the man you really wanted, but this is your chance to make something good come of it. Use Ryan's success to help your family." The audacity of it took my breath away, just like it had on the morning she'd convinced me to switch fiancés. Emma was asking me to prostitute my marriage, to use my husband's resources to bail out the man she'd stolen from me. "I'll ask him," I said quietly. Relief flooded her face. "Thank you." "Oh, Lisa, thank you. I knew I could count on you." After she left, I sat in my kitchen and thought about poison. Not the literal kind Emma had fed me in our first life, but the metaphorical poison of enabling someone's worst impulses, of refusing to let them face reality. When Ryan came home, I told him about Emma's visit. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. "What did you tell her?" he asked when I finished. "That I'd ask you." "And what do you want me to say?" I looked at my husband, this good man who had given me everything I'd never known I wanted, and I made a choice that would have been impossible in my first life. "I want you to say no." Ryan nodded once, sharp and final. "Then that's what I'll say." Emma's second breakdown came 2 weeks later, this time at 3 a.m. She pounded on our door until Ryan answered it, her face streaked with mascara and her voice raw from crying. "He's leaving me," she gasped. "Tim's leaving me. He says it's my fault, says I'm dead weight, says he needs to start over clean." I wrapped a robe around myself and came to stand beside Ryan. Emma looked terrible, thin and pale and desperate, like a woman who'd been living on stress and false hope for too long. "What happened?" I asked. "The investors pulled out. All of them. Tim owes money to people who don't take no for an answer. And instead of fighting for us, for our marriage, he's just running. He's taking what cash he can get his hands on and disappearing." She collapsed onto our couch like a broken doll, and I felt a familiar tug of sympathy. This was my sister, the girl I'd shared a bedroom with, the woman I'd loved enough to die for in another life. But then she looked up at me with eyes that were calculating even through her tears, and I remembered who I was dealing with. Lisa, I need money. Just enough to get by until I can figure things out. I know Ryan's doing well, I know you two could help me if you wanted to. Emma. I'm your sister, she cried. Your twin sister. Doesn't that mean anything to you? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with years of manipulation and guilt and love that had curdled into something toxic. Ryan's hand found mine, his fingers warm and steady, anchoring me to the present. It means everything to me, I said quietly. That's why I can't give you money. Emma's face went through a series of expressions, confusion, hurt, rage, and finally a cold calculation that reminded me exactly why I'd died in our first life. I see, she said, her voice suddenly calm. I see what this is about. You're enjoying this, aren't you? You're enjoying watching me fail. Emma. You never forgave me for taking Tim. All this time, you've been waiting for your revenge. Well, congratulations, Lisa. You got it. She stood up, smoothing her hair with hands that shook slightly. But just remember, I gave you the better man. I could have kept Ryan for myself, but I thought Tim was worth more. I was wrong about that, but I wasn't wrong about giving you the better deal. Even now, even in the depths of her own destruction, Emma was trying to rewrite history. She was casting herself as the generous sister who'd made a sacrifice, rather than the greedy woman who'd stolen what she thought was the bigger prize. You're right, I said, and watched her blink in surprise. You did give me the better man. You gave me everything I never knew I wanted. For a moment, her face showed genuine confusion, as if she couldn't understand why I wasn't angry or grateful or any of the emotions she'd expected. Then Ryan spoke, his voice quiet but carrying the authority of a man who'd commanded soldiers in war zones. I think you should leave now, Emma. She looked between us, and I saw the moment when she finally understood. We weren't going to save her. We weren't going to enable her mistakes or clean up her messes. We were going to let her face the consequences of her choices, the same way she'd let me face the consequences of trusting her. Fine, she said, her voice brittle with false dignity. I should have known better than to expect help from family. After she left, Ryan and I sat in our living room in the pre-dawn darkness, holding each other while we processed what had just happened. Do you think she'll be okay? I asked. Eventually, Ryan said. Emma's a survivor. She'll land on her feet. He was right, of course. Emma did survive, though not in the way she'd expected. Tim disappeared as predicted, leaving her with nothing but debts and a reputation in ruins. She had to move back in with our parents, take a job at a department store, rebuild her life from the ground up. But she did rebuild it. Slowly, quietly, without any of the flash and drama she'd once craved. She met a man who worked at the hardware store next to where she sold cosmetics, a good man, a steady man, someone who loved her for who she was rather than who she pretended to be. I watched from a distance as Emma learned the lessons I'd hoped she would learn. She discovered that happiness wasn't about having the most expensive things or being envied by others. She learned to find joy in simple moments, in honest work, in a love that didn't come with conditions or calculations. It took her 3 years to swallow her pride enough to call me. Lisa, she said, her voice different, softer, more genuine than I'd heard it in years. I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. We met for coffee at a small cafe near her apartment, and I was struck by how different she looked. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a sweater that looked comfortable rather than expensive. Her hair was shorter, natural, and her face had lines of character that hadn't been there before. I was horrible to you, she said without preamble. I was selfish and manipulative, and I convinced myself it was for your own good, but really I just wanted what I thought was better for me. I stirred my coffee, studying my sister's face. She looked tired but peaceful, like someone who had finally stopped running from herself. I know, I said simply. I keep thinking about that morning when I convinced you to switch fiancés. I told myself I was doing you a favor, but I was just being greedy. I saw what I thought was a better deal and I took it, and I didn't care what it cost you. Emma. Let me finish, please. She took a shaky breath. I need to say this. He was exactly what I deserved. He was as selfish as I was, as willing to hurt people to get what he wanted. We deserved each other. I wanted to tell her that no one deserved to be abandoned and left with crushing debt, but I held my tongue. This was Emma's confession, not mine. But you, she continued, you deserved better. You deserved Ryan. And somehow, even though I was trying to cheat you, I ended up giving you exactly what you needed. I've been happy, I said quietly. Happier than I ever imagined possible. I know. I can see it. She smiled, and for the first time in years, it looked genuine. You glow differently now. Like you're lit from the inside. We talked for 2 hours, clearing the air between us in a way we'd never managed before. Emma told me about her new life, her job, her boyfriend who thought she was beautiful even in her work uniform. I told her about the nonprofit, about Ryan's success, about the house we'd finally bought with the garden I'd always dreamed of. Are you happy? I asked as we prepared to leave. Emma considered the question seriously. I'm content, she said finally. I'm grateful. I'm learning to appreciate what I have instead of always wanting what I don't. I think that might be better than happy. As we hugged goodbye, Emma whispered in my ear, thank you for not saving me from my mistakes. I know you could have, and I know I asked you to. But if you had, I never would have learned to save myself. The final chapter of our story began 5 years after our weddings, when Emma showed up at my door with an invitation in her hand and tears in her eyes. I'm getting married, she said, and this time the tears were happy ones. To David, the man I told you about. He's nothing like Tim, he's kind and honest and he sees the best in me even when I can't see it myself. Emma, that's wonderful. I want you to be my maid of honor, she said, her voice trembling. I know I don't deserve it, I know I haven't been the sister you deserved, but... Of course, I said, pulling her into a hug. Of course I'll be your maid of honor. Emma's second wedding was everything her first one hadn't been. It was small and intimate, held in our parents' backyard with just close family and a few friends. Emma wore a simple dress that she'd bought herself, and David wore a suit he'd owned for years but had pressed specially for the occasion. There was no pretense, no performance, no attempt to impress anyone. There was just love, real, honest, complicated love between two people who had both made mistakes and were choosing to build something better together. As I watched Emma walk down the aisle toward a man who looked at her like she hung the moon, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge. This was what I'd wanted for my sister all along, not the punishment of an unhappy marriage, but the gift of understanding what real love looked like. Ryan squeezed my hand as we watched the ceremony, and I leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne. In a few months, we'd be adding a new member to our family, the baby I was carrying, the child that doctors had told me I'd never have with Tim. Life had a way of working out, I thought. Not in the ways you expected, not always in the ways you thought you wanted, but in the ways you needed. After the reception, as Ryan and I drove home through the quiet streets of our neighborhood, I found myself thinking about second chances. Not everyone got them, and not everyone knew how to use them when they came. But sometimes, if you were very lucky and very wise, you got the chance to rewrite your story. To choose love over ambition, substance over flash, truth over comfortable lies. Emma had needed to fall before she could learn to fly. I had needed to die before I could truly live. And in the end, we had both found our way to happiness, just not in the ways we'd originally planned. What are you thinking about? Ryan asked, glancing over at me as we pulled into our driveway. I looked at our house, modest but beautiful, with the garden I tended and the porch where we sat together in the evenings, and I thought about the life we'd built together. It wasn't the life I'd dreamed of as a young woman, but it was better. It was real. I'm thinking about choices, I said. And consequences. And how sometimes the thing that seems like a disaster turns out to be the best thing that ever happened to you. Ryan smiled, the expression that had first made me fall in love with him in this second life. Like your sister stealing your fiancé? Exactly like that. I took his hand as we walked to the door together. The best mistake she ever made was thinking she was getting the better deal. Inside our house, I could hear the future calling, the baby's room we'd start decorating soon, the family dinners and birthday parties and quiet Sunday mornings that stretched ahead of us. A lifetime of small, perfect moments with a man who had chosen me and kept choosing me, every single day. Emma had taught me something valuable in both our lives, though she'd never meant to, that happiness wasn't something you could steal or scheme your way into. It was something you had to build, day by day, choice by choice, with someone who loved the person you actually were rather than the person you pretended to be. As I fell asleep that night in Ryan's arms, I whispered a small thank you to whatever force had given us this second chance. Not everyone got to rewrite their story, but I had used mine wisely. And this time, I knew exactly how it would end, with love, with truth, and with the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived.